What's up, y'all? Hope y'all doing good. I'm Anthony K. Thomas. I am an independent writer, author, um, storyteller, future New York Times bestseller, and I've written over the last almost 2 years. I've written several books, and I talk about them every day, whether it's through backseat reading, whether I just post a quick thing where I talk about the book and then do a reading from the book. However it is, I constantly talk about these books because I believe in every single book that I write, and I am proud of every single book that I've written. But there are some books that I feel that I've written are important, and to me, I feel that they are important because I was scared in writing them because of the topic that I was focusing on at that time with those books. So I just want to take a quick few moments, probably a little bit longer than 3 minutes, and just talk about these books really quick, and nothing too long on all of them. Just a quick sum. So the first one, In the Dark, the Sun Will Rise. It is a story that takes place on April 4th, 1968, the same day as Martin Luther King's assassination, where 6 lives are changed forever in Los Angeles, California. Now, this book, this book is written during a time where people of color, like myself, who is biracial, were called names and looked at very differently. Sadly, it's not as you don't it. Sadly, it's still something that goes on. It's not something a lot of us see all the time. Um, like it was something that you would see more back then, but it's still something that is still happening as far as the name calling and how people are being treated based on how they look. And especially when you look at an administration, a presidential administration, and how they treat people that are Americans but are not the kind of Americans that they like necessarily, and how they are treated. Um, but this story takes place in 1968, where that was more common back then, especially people who are gay. And in this story, you are dealing with a character who has a father who is part of a Jefferson chapter in the Ku Klux Klan and looks to revenge his father's death. You would look at him as the villain, as the bad guy in this story. Then you look at a man named David, an African American man who hides the fact that knows he's gay and that is gay, and eventually meets and falls in love with a Caucasian male named Tim, and they become an interracial gay couple. Then you look at two best friends, and Martin and Malcolm, who are part of the Black Panther movement, but look at being a part of the Black Panthers very differently. They're best friends, they're brothers, but they look at being a part of the Black Panthers differently. And then you look at a young woman named Rosa, who is biracial, who has who has a father who is white, a mother that is black, which is something that was kept quiet, something very rare during that period in the 1960s, especially in the 50s and in the 40s. And she is raised on a ship filled with different racial, cultural backgrounds and beliefs. And even though everyone gets along, everyone has their agreements, but they're able to discuss these agreements without it leading to violence, and have moments where they agree to disagree in those arguments. And she's raised on that ship, filled with all those backgrounds, being able to get along, and she is hit with a complete culture shock when she steps off that ship when she turns 18, and sees what and is introduced to what she reads in the newspaper that actually happens. And everything that happens in this story primarily happens is all on a single day in 1968, on the same day as Martin Luther King's assassination. And as you read this story, learning about these people. You learn about their story. You get a backstory, and you learn about who these people are, and then how they all ended up in Los Angeles, California on this particular day April 4th, 1968, all what they all have in common, and how they all have a common enemy within the villain, who is Connor. And that is In the Dark the Sun Will Rise. Next is Matthew, a Toy Story prequel. And what makes this important to me, what made this scary for me to write, is strictly because Toy Story, it is Pixar, it is Disney. And the fear in writing this, I wrote this originally in end of October into November of 2020. And at first I wrote it just for me to answer. I wrote it for me, and then I put it on my WordPress page for anyone who wanted to read it. But the part that scared me, and constantly coming back to it over the next couple of years, to then finally independently publishing this book, and that was the part that scared me, was the fear of Pixar or Disney or both seeing that I put this out there, independently published it, and have them sue me over this, over the characters that are mentioned, primarily Woody, but also how I mention Andy, and how I give Andy and Andy's mother lines in this story, dialogue. Not Matthew, because Matthew is a character that I created, who is Andy's father. And that part scared me about putting that out there. But this is an important story, I feel, because it answers questions about who is Andy's father, it answers questions about Woody, how he became that family heirloom. And it really kind of brings the first 3 Toy Story films more of a full circle, and gives the ending to Toy Story 3 a lot more meaning. And what I mean by that is the end of that movie, where Andy is about to go off to college, and Andy hands Woody, as well as all his other toys, to this little girl. And what Andy does for this little girl is the same thing that you read about what Andy's father Matthew does for Andy when Matthew hands Andy Woody, and gives Andy, and it's Andy's turn to go on all these adventures with Woody that Woody went on with Andy's father Matthew, when Matthew got Woody for a birthday present many years ago in 1957. And that's where that story starts. It starts in 1957, and it goes all the way to 1995, right before that first Toy Story movie. And it really brings those first 3 Toy Story movies full circle. In a way, it makes it feel more complete, especially giving that ending to Toy Story 3 a lot more ending. And when I realized what I was writing, and how it's really a generational story of passing a toy down from father to son, the importance of Woody. Once I really realized what it was I wrote, I wasn't scared anymore about what if Pixar does decide to sue me, or what if Disney, or what if both of them decide to sue me. Because if it gets me to have a conversation with them, which I have nonstop been trying to do, which is why I always talk about Matthew, a Toy Story prequel, and I get on here and I talk about the plot of it, and over again, with leaving those hashtags on there for Disney and Pixar, because I want to get in touch with them. I don't know how to actually do that, because they don't look for people outside of their inner circle. Everything is in-house. And I don't have a literary agent or an entertainment agent to get their attention. So the only best way I know how to do that is to be consistent and just keep talking about Matthew. But I would love it if I could just be able to be in a boardroom or even in a courtroom, but as long as I'm able to talk about Matthew, a Toy Story prequel, with those that I want to talk about it with, and and hopefully get something going here where magic can happen, and we can take what's in these pages and transport it onto the screen, and people can see this story. I have it in my head about how it goes, and how I have it in my head is how I wrote it in here. There's both a story and screenplay version in this book. It's very important. It's one of those very important books that I would love to see it be turned into something that people could see on the screen. And to try to get Pixar and Disney's attention is no easy feat, but I don't ever intend to stop talking about this. It's one of those important books, and I would love to just sit and talk to them. So I'm gonna keep talking about this with them, but I wanted to add this to the collection of those books that are important to me, that I've written, important books that I've written. Another book is called Fighting for My Life. And Fighting for My Life is a story about a character named Vincent who learns he has cancer, and then battles his cancer and goes through his own battles with cancer as he fights it, as he goes through mental health struggles of having cancer. But then you also see the other side of it as well, of how the people within his circle, the people he cares about, how they are handling and how they are coping with Vincent having cancer, and the ups and downs of it, how his parents are doing. It's a story that really got started from a dream I had about sitting in a doctor's office and hearing the doctor tell me that I have cancer. And it went from there, and I just really just kind of went through the notions and experience and the research and trying to make it feel as real as possible. And there's a character that Vincent talks to while he's sitting in a chemo room that is a character from another book that I wrote, which is something that I haven't really done before, and it was really a nice little thing to add to that. Kind of like if you read the book prior and then you read this book, you kind of learn about what happened to that character after everything that happened in the events of that book, of the other book. So I thought that was cool. But to write about cancer was another one of those scary things for me to do. But it was therapeutic in a way, and it was good for me to write this book, to really go through life and what it's like if all of a sudden you have cancer and it's just out of the blue. But then also I add a little bit of a love story because this is me we're talking about, and I love writing love stories. But I wanted to start the story like it feels like it's a love story, and then it ends. You're kind of like at the end of that relationship, but it ends in a very beautiful way where we eventually come back to it at the very end in the very end of this book, in the epilogue of it, and learn about what happens next between Vincent and this woman that he loves, and what happens after that, and you learn whether or not he survives his cancer or not. So there's a lot that happens in this book, but it was one of those important books. Storytime with D. Anthony KT, a collection of my short stories. Now, what's important about this book is that it is a story where I write about loneliness, it's love stories, children's stories, mental health stories, a story of tell someone you love them while you can. And that's what makes this important, because it is a mixture of all these different things, of all these different types of stories. 2 children's stories about being different, and about how being different is not a bad thing, how it's a good thing. And a mental health story about a young man named Elliot. It's called Dear Elliot, and Dear Elliot is a story about the character Elliot, who sits in a therapist's office, who is talking about what he almost did, and almost killing himself, going through hard times, and then hearing 2 letters from his close friends, with each letter starting with Dear Elliot, and they're reading letters of how they feel about what Elliot almost did, and how they feel bad about how life has kind of taken over their lives, and the checking in like they used to has kind of stopped because of life and how things kind of go in life. And there's another story called The Young Man, in which excuse me, in which the young man is has a friend who is a woman, and their friendship starts out, and throughout their friendship, the young man eventually starts to feel love for this woman. Pardon me. And instead of telling this woman how he feels, there's a fear that starts to build up within him of what would happen if he tells this woman how he really feels, how he loves her. And that fear eventually begins to plague his mind with negative thoughts. And then she eventually, and then you learn about everything that happens in that story between those two, about how he kept these feelings to himself, kept they remained friends, but learning how he is dealing with everything. And it's really a story about how if you have someone in your life, if you love someone, life is short. Sometimes it's shorter than we expected. And while they're in your life, tell them how you feel. So much of life can be wasted on waiting. And as scary as it can be to tell someone, you gotta fight through that and just tell that person how you feel while they're still here, while you're still here. So it's a mixture of all these different stories, but it's one of those important ones. The next one is the most recent one. It's called Darkness. And this is a mental health story. It's a story about suicide. It's a story about a young biracial man named Chris Adams, who is battling his own darkness after the tragic loss of a friend and his parents. And as he's battling this darkness and doing his best to live his life, he eventually reaches a crossroads between his life and the darkness he battles. This story, you go into the story already knowing that Chris has killed himself. But the point of the story is to learn about Chris Adams, about the people in his life, and how Chris ended up getting to the point where he, even with all this love and support that he had, he still battles this darkness alone, and how he gets to a point in his life where he no longer can battle it anymore, and he feels that darkness has completely consumed him after so many years of darkness eating away at him, how he gets to that point where he kills himself. And what made this a hard story for me to write was because it was really digging into myself. It was really digging into a moment in my life where I almost did that, where I almost killed myself, and battling with my own darkness, and how I felt like everything was hopeless and I just wanted to stop the pain and didn't see a way out, and how I almost took my life. But not doing what Chris did in this story, and having those people in my life as well, and listening to them, and really thinking about what does killing myself actually do to everyone else, and then being able to realize that it's okay not to be okay, and asking for help. And that's what this story is. It's a story with a message that it's never a bad thing or a weak thing to ask for help. If it's okay not to be okay, and sometimes it takes a village, and it doesn't make you any lesser of a person, any weaker of a person if you ask that village for help. So Darkness, one of my most important books that I've written. The next one is called The Freshman. And what made this story, makes this one of those important books that I wrote, is that it talks about bullying, and then eventually also gun violence, and how these two girls are freshmen, and they're being bullied by this notorious group known as the Upperclassmen, a group that's been around for a very long time. And you learn, and there's a little backstory about the Upperclassmen that you learn about in this book. But the Upperclassmen target Brenda and Kendra, and Brenda and Kendra do everything that they can to get the Upperclassmen to leave them alone. They even go to adults to ask for help. They go to the teacher, they go to the principal. But none of that works. The Upperclassmen still go after them. So then a last resort idea comes into their mind that involves using guns to scare the Upperclassmen to get them to leave them alone. But as we all know, that when you involve guns, it doesn't always go the way you think it will. It always tends to get out of hand, and that is something that happens in The Freshman. It's that book that I put off, not only writing but independently publishing, because so much of gun violence kept happening every time I started writing this book. Something within gun violence at a school happened. Even as recently with the whole thing with Charlie Kirk happened as well. And it really questioned whether or not I should be putting this out. It always felt like bad timing. And then I reached a conclusion that there's never going to be a right time to put a book like this out. So you just got to put it out. And I'm glad that I put this out. I am proud of this book, and it's one of those books that are very important to read because it leaves a message that if you see something, say something. And I can understand how there are people that see something happening but don't want to get involved and can negatively think of what happens if they get involved. But if you see something, if you see something, say something, because at the end of the day, you'll be doing something that is good to help that person who's going through whatever it is that person is going through. And sometimes a lending hand goes a long way. Being kind goes a long way to that person that is going through whatever they're going through. And the last book that I wanted to talk about is called My Life in a Nutshell. It is a story about my life. It's my memoir. It is a story that is the most honest I've been about my own life. I am normally a private person. I love talking about all of my books, but when it comes to my life, I can be fairly private. If I don't know you very well, I can be fairly private. I'm getting better at that, of just being an open book and just being able to answer questions that anybody might have about me. But in this book, in this book, it's the most honest I am about myself. It was therapeutic, and being able to talk about my father, about his death, being able to talk about my mother, being able to talk about my love for pro wrestling and what it has done for me personally, being able to talk about music and what music has been like for me, and the people that have come and gone from my life, and those people, how they've introduced music to me, different types of music. I talk about love and my own love story that I've had and lost, and the chapter in Waiting for Her, and the idea of this woman that could be out there that's for me, that I'm still waiting for her. Even though I'm a little iffy about if I'll ever meet her again. But it's the most honest in talking about my life and talking about being biracial, talking about dealing with the police and all of it. There's so much I talk about in this book about my life, and it's, if not the most important book I have written. And all the other books I've written, when it comes to the mock memoirs, the good versus evil stories, the love stories, the mental health story that I've written, even the short story that I've written called The Path, which is also another short story. All these stories are all important in their own way, and I've had little struggle in writing each of these stories because of the topic that I'm focusing on and what I'm writing, even though some of them are love stories, and I love writing love stories, but it's the struggle in it is trying to write a love story that will be different from a previous love story that I've written. But whether it's love, a good versus evil story, a mock memoir, a mental health story, there are so many books that I've written, so many stories that I've written, and I'm proud of every single one of them. And I wanted to get on here real quick and share that with all of you. And I appreciate you taking what probably feels like 20 minutes or so talking about these books, these important books that I've written. And I hope all of you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourselves. If you're interested in reading any of these books, you will find a Linktree link in my bio, and that will take you to my Linktree page. You'll see all the books that I have talked about, as well as many others that are available now on barnesandnoble.com or on Amazon. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you on the next one. Peace, y'all.